There's been a lot in the news over the past few years about Russian interference in America's internal political system. However, did you know that just over 100 years ago, America actually invaded Russia? This is the story of the American Expeditionary Force North, better known as the Polar Bear Expedition. The purpose of the Polar Bear Expedition was twofold: to secure the Allied war materials that had been stockpiled in Russia to prevent them from falling into the hands of the Bolsheviks, and also to attempt to rescue the Czech Legion, which was trapped between the Bolsheviks and the White Russians on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. The first American troops landed at Arkhangelsk in far northern Russia on September 4th, 1918, and were placed under the command of British forces, which had arrived a month earlier. These American troops were primarily from the 339th Infantry Regiment of the Michigan National Guard. These troops saw their first action against the Bolsheviks a few weeks later, with the majority of fighting taking place along the Vina River. While the Americans experienced initial successes against the Bolsheviks, their lines eventually became far too long and difficult to maintain and supply. This, coupled with the Bolshevik counteroffensive that occurred during the winter of 1918-1919, pushed the Americans back to the port of Arkhangelsk, which by that time was frozen over for winter. Morale amongst the American troops in northern Russia plummeted during these winter months due to news of the armistice that had been reached in Western Europe, signaling the end of the First World War, and also due to a lack of a clearly understood mission in Russia. There were actually reports of mutinies during the winter amongst American troops in Russia. Finally, in April of 1919, word came from President Woodrow Wilson to begin the process of withdrawing American troops from northern Russia. The withdrawal process began on May 26, 1919, and was completed by August 5, 1919, when the Polar Bear Expedition was officially disbanded. During their time in Russia, the Americans of the 339th Infantry Regiment suffered 553 casualties, with the majority of those being from the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 to 1919. There was also another American expeditionary force that was sent to Siberia during this same time period, primarily around the port of Vladivostok. These Americans in Siberia arrived in August of 1918 and were withdrawn in April of 1920. Although the goals of the Polar Bear Expedition were not entirely achieved, it remains a little-known chapter in American history, and some might call it the very first battle of the Cold War, and it's history that should be remembered. Yay! Good job.